The mining station orbited a dead planet, its metal hull scarred by decades of asteroid impacts and solar radiation. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the slow rotation of the barren world below. 3 months ago, this place had been called Kepler 442c. Now the locals just called it the graveyard. The distress signal had been weak, almost lost in the cosmic background noise. Standard protocol said to investigate any SOS within jump range, but Sarah's crew of the cargo vessel Endurance had debated whether to respond. They were already behind schedule delivering medical supplies to the outer colonies, and detours meant lost profits. But Sarah had insisted. Something about the signal felt wrong, not just desperate, but young. "Captain, we're picking up massive debris fields around the station," reported Lieutenant Torres from the navigation console. "Looks like..." "Jesus, Cap, looks like an entire fleet got torn apart out here." Sarah nodded grimly. The wreckage told a story she'd seen too many times in the frontier sectors. The hegemony had been here. The authoritarian alliance of older species had a simple policy toward younger civilizations: submit or be eliminated. They called it galactic stability. "Life signs?" she asked. "Minimal. The station's running on emergency power, atmosphere is holding but barely." "I'm reading, wait." Torres frowned at his instruments. "One life form. Small. Mammalian, I think." The docking procedure took 20 minutes. Sarah suited up personally, despite her crew's protests. As captain, dangerous first contacts were her responsibility. The airlock cycled, and she stepped into the station's dim corridors. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows on the walls. The air tasted of recycled fear and ozone from failing systems. Sarah's boots crunched on scattered debris as she followed her scanner toward the life sign. The station had been beautiful once. Even in the emergency lighting, she could see the flowing architectural lines that marked Zephyrian construction, all curves and organic shapes, like living coral grown in space. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as master builders and peaceful traders. Sarah found the survivor in what had been the station's central garden. Hydroponic systems lay shattered, their nutrient solutions frozen into crystalline formations on the floor. Exotic plants from a dozen worlds hung withered and brown from their supports. In the center of the destruction sat a small figure. The Zephyrian cub couldn't have been more than 10 years old in human terms. Its fur was a deep blue-black, marked with silver stripes that seemed to shift in the dim light. Large, dark eyes tracked Sarah's movement as she approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "Hello," Sarah said softly, activating her suit's universal translator. "I'm Sarah. I heard your signal." The cub's ears flattened against its head. When it spoke, its voice was barely a whisper. "There's no one left." Sarah felt her heart break a little. She'd seen war orphans before, but something about this one hit differently. Maybe it was the way it sat so still, like a small statue of grief. Maybe it was the careful way it had arranged the bodies. Because there were bodies. Sarah's enhanced vision picked up the heat signatures of 3 adult Zephyrians arranged in a neat row near the garden's central fountain. Someone had covered them with strips of cloth torn from curtains, had placed small flowering branches on each chest. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, settling down on her heels to seem less threatening. "Kess." The cub's translation came through with overtones of loneliness that made Sarah's throat tight. "Are you here to take me away? Would you like me to?" Kess considered this with the serious attention only children could give simple questions. "I don't know where I would go. Mother said there were safe places, but..." The young voice trailed off. Sarah looked around the devastated garden. What happened here? The ships came. Big ones with the mark of the hegemony. Father tried to talk to them, tried to explain we were just traders, that we'd paid all the tribute taxes. Kessa's voice stayed level, but its ears drooped. They said the station was harboring rebels. They said we had to be punished as an example. The story was familiar. The hegemony had been expanding aggressively for the past decade, claiming that younger species were destabilizing influences that needed firm guidance. In practice, this meant slavery or death. How did you survive? Sarah asked gently. Mother hid me in the emergency shelter when the shooting started. She said to stay until someone came, someone friendly. She said I'd know. Kess looked up at Sarah with those huge dark eyes. You feel friendly. Sarah smiled despite the grief clawing at her chest. Thank you. That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. For the first time, Kessa's ears perked up slightly. Really? Really? Now, can you tell me about your family? I'd like to know about them. As Kess spoke, Sarah began to understand the scope of the tragedy. The mining station had been home to nearly 50 Zephyrians, 3 extended family groups who'd pooled resources to set up an independent operation. They'd been processing rare minerals from the asteroid belt, trading with human colonies and other species for supplies they couldn't manufacture themselves. It should have been a peaceful life. The Zephyrians were known as excellent negotiators and honest dealers. They'd never been involved in any conflicts, had no military beyond basic security systems. But the hegemony didn't care about peaceful intentions. They killed everyone? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Not everyone all at once. Kessa's voice got smaller. Some they took for questioning. Uncle Thren tried to fight them when they hurt Aunt Sivla. They made examples of them in the main bay, where everyone could see. Sarah closed her eyes. She'd heard similar stories from other survivors, other refugee camps. The hegemony's methods were designed to break spirits as much as bodies. How long have you been alone? 18 days. I've been eating the emergency rations and I buried the ones I could move. Kess gestured toward the covered bodies. Mother and father and cousin Jex. The others are still in the main bay. I couldn't, they're too heavy. 18 days. Sarah marveled that the young Zephyrian had survived so long alone, maintaining the station's basic systems, rationing food, even performing funeral rites for its family. Most adult humans would have broken down completely. Kess, Sarah said carefully, would you like to come with me? My ship isn't much, just a cargo hauler, but we could find you somewhere safe. The cub's ears flattened again. Where is safe? The hegemony has ships everywhere. They hunt down survivors, make sure there are no witnesses to their enforcement actions. Sarah had to admit Kess had a point. The outer colonies were technically neutral, but many were too weak to resist hegemony pressure. Earth itself was still officially at peace with the Alliance, though tensions had been rising for months. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. But I promise you won't be alone anymore. Kess stared at her for a long moment. You're human, aren't you? I've never met a human before. Father said your species was unpredictable. That's one word for it. Sarah managed a small smile. We're also stubborn. And we don't like bullies. The hegemony are bullies? The biggest bullies in the galaxy. Kess seemed to consider this. Mother always said bullies only understand strength. Smart mother. She was. She knew 17 languages and could calculate hyperspace jumps in her head. Kessa's voice carried a mixture of pride and fresh grief. She said humans were dangerous because you never know when to quit. Sarah laughed softly. Also true. So what do you say? Want to find out how dangerous we can be? For the first time since Sarah had arrived, Kess stood up. The cub was small even for its species, probably barely reaching Sarah's waist. But, something in its posture suddenly seemed older, more determined. "I want them to pay," Kes said quietly. "All of them. For mother and father and everyone else." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's failing life support. She recognized that tone, that particular mixture of grief and rage that could drive someone to extraordinary lengths. She'd heard it in her own voice after the hegemony had glassed the colony where she'd grown up. "They will," Sarah promised. "But, first, we need to get you somewhere safe. And fed. And probably cleaned up." She gestured at Kessa's matted fur and the torn clothing hanging from its small frame. "I don't want to be safe," Kes said with surprising intensity. "I want to fight. Fighting comes later. Trust me on this. First, you need to be strong. You need to learn. You need allies." Sarah stood and extended her hand. "And you need to live. That's the most important thing right now, staying alive when they wanted you dead." Kes looked at the offered hand, then, at the covered bodies of its family. "Will you help me remember them? Their stories?" "Every one," Sarah promised. "And, when the time comes, we'll make sure the galaxy remembers them too." The cub reached out and took Sarah's gloved hand in its small, furred paw. "Okay. But, I want to say goodbye first." Sarah waited while Kes performed what seemed to be a traditional Zephyrian farewell ritual, touching its forehead to each covered body and speaking in its musical native language. The words didn't translate, but their meaning was clear enough. When Kes was finished, it looked up at Sarah with eyes that seemed far too old for its young face. "I'm ready now." As they walked back through the station's darkened corridors, Sarah found herself thinking about the responsibilities she'd just taken on. Caring for a traumatized alien child was complicated enough without the political implications. Harboring a hegemony massacre survivor could be seen as an act of war. But, looking down at Kessa's determined little face, Sarah realized she didn't care about the politics. The hegemony had made this personal the moment they decided to murder children. "Sarah?" Kessa's voice was small in the corridor's gloom. "Yeah? Thank you for coming." Sarah squeezed the small hand in hers. "Thank you for waiting." Behind them, the station continued its slow orbit around the dead world, keeping silent watch over the graveyard of a peaceful species. But, ahead lay the unknown, and Sarah Chen had always been good at making her own kind of sense from chaos. The war was coming whether they wanted it or not. The hegemony had made sure of that. The only question now was what kind of war it would be. The Endurance wasn't built for passengers, especially young alien ones with complex dietary needs and trauma-induced nightmares. Sarah's crew had done their best to make Kes comfortable, converting a small storage compartment into something resembling a bedroom. Lieutenant Torres had even managed to synthesize a protein mixture that approximated Zephyrian nutrition requirements. But, 3 weeks into their journey, it was clear that comfort wasn't Kessa's primary concern. "Show me again," the young Zephyrian insisted, perched on a crate in the ship's small cargo bay. "The energy distribution patterns when you fire the plasma cannons." Chief Engineer Rodriguez looked helplessly at Sarah. "Cap, I really don't think it's okay, Rodriguez." Sarah nodded toward the holographic display they'd rigged up. "Show him." The past weeks had revealed something unexpected about their young passenger. Beneath the grief and trauma lay a mind of remarkable capability. Kes absorbed technical information like a sponge, asking questions that often stumped Sarah's experienced crew. The Zephyrians might have been peaceful traders, but they'd clearly valued education. "Look here," Rodriguez said, pointing to the energy flow diagrams. "When we charge the capacitors, the power grid has to compensate for the sudden draw. If we don't sequence it properly, the life support systems would fluctuate," Kes interrupted. "But, if you staggered the charge cycle and rerouted power through the secondary conduits, you could maintain a steady output while increasing the cannon's effective range by approximately 12%. Rodriguez stared at the young alien. How did you? That's graduate-level engineering. Mother taught me, Kes said simply. She said knowledge was the only thing no one could take from you. Sarah felt the familiar pang of loss. Every day brought new revelations about what the galaxy had lost when the hegemony destroyed that mining station. Kes's family hadn't just been traders, they'd been scientists, engineers, artists. An entire repository of knowledge and culture, wiped out for the crime of existing independently. Captain, Torres called from the bridge. You need to see this. Sarah made her way forward, Kes trailing behind despite her repeated attempts to leave the cub in the cargo bay. In the 3 weeks since the rescue, Kes had refused to be separated from her for more than a few minutes. Child psychologists would probably call it attachment syndrome. Sarah just called it heartbreaking. What have we got? She asked. Long-range sensors are picking up a debris field. Big one. And? Torres hesitated. It's fresh, Cap. Whatever happened here, it was recent. The main screen showed a scattered field of wreckage tumbling slowly through space. Sarah recognized the design elements immediately, sleek, organic curves that could only be Zephyrian. But these ships were different from the mining station. These were passenger vessels, refugees fleeing the hegemony's expansion. Life signs? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer from Torres's expression. Negative. Whatever hit them was thorough. Kes pressed closer to the view screen, its young face reflecting the cold light of the stars. Those are evacuation ships, it said quietly. I recognize the hull markings. They're from the Verdant Reach colonies. Sarah knelt down beside the cub. How can you tell? The geometric patterns along the engine housings. Each colony cluster has its own design language. These are definitely Reach ships. Kes's voice carried a mixture of technical knowledge and fresh grief. There were probably 3,000 people aboard those vessels. 3,000. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process the scale of the massacre. The hegemony wasn't just eliminating military targets anymore, they were systematically hunting down civilian refugees. Captain, Rodriguez called from the engineering station. I'm detecting something else. A small object, roughly 2 clicks from the main debris field. It's broadcasting. On screen. The object resolved into a standard escape pod, its hull scorched but intact. A weak emergency beacon pulsed in the darkness. Life signs? Faint, but yes. One occupant, probably in hibernation mode. Sarah made the decision instantly. Bring us alongside. Prep the medical bay. Cap, this could be a trap, Torres warned. The hegemony has used survivor beacons before too. It's not a trap, Kes interrupted. Look at the beacon frequency. That's a Zephyrian emergency code, and it's broadcasting a personal identifier. Sarah looked at the young alien with renewed respect. Can you decode it? Kes's ears perked up slightly, the first sign of genuine hope Sarah had seen from the cub. It says the occupant is Master Engineer Vex Tailwind, Chief Technical Officer of the Verdant Reach Defense Cooperative. Defense Cooperative? Sarah raised an eyebrow. The Civilian Resistance Network, Kes explained. After the first colonies were attacked, some of the survivors started organizing. They've been trying to evacuate non-combatants and establish safe havens. Sarah felt a spark of interest. A resistance network would have intelligence, resources, connections. More importantly, they'd have the kind of detailed knowledge about hegemony operations that Earth's military desperately needed. Bring him aboard. The rescue operation took an hour. Master Engineer Vex Tailwind turned out to be an elderly Zephyrian with silver-gray fur and intelligent amber eyes. Unlike Kessa's youthful features, Vex's face carried the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. He regained consciousness in the medical bay, immediately trying to sit up despite the restraints. "Easy," Sarah said, moving into his line of sight. "You're safe. We're humans." Vex's eyes widened. "Humans? But, what are you doing in hegemony space?" "Officially? Delivering medical supplies to the outer colonies." "Unofficially?" Sarah gestured to Kess, who'd insisted on being present for the awakening. "Picking up strays." Vex's gaze fixed on the young cub, and Sarah saw recognition dawn in his amber eyes. "By the 7 stars. Kess. Kess Brightwater." Kessa's ears shot up. "You know me? Your mother sent me technical specifications for the new mining extractors just 2 months ago. We were planning to implement them across the Reach colonies." Vex struggled to sit up again, and, this time Sarah helped him. "Child, your family's research could have revolutionized small-scale resource processing. When we heard about the station..." "They're gone," Kess said quietly. "All of them." Vex reached out with a trembling hand to touch the cub's shoulder. "I'm sorry, young one. They were good people. Brilliant people." Sarah let them have their moment of shared grief before gently interrupting. "Master Engineer, we need to know what happened to the refugee convoy." Vex's expression hardened. "Betrayal. We had safe passage guarantees from the Neutral Zone Authority, but someone leaked our route to the hegemony. They were waiting for us." "How many ships?" "A full battle group. 3 destroyers and a carrier. They didn't even bother with surrender demands, just opened fire the moment we dropped out of hyperspace." Vex's voice carried the bitter weight of survivors' guilt. "I was in the engineering section when the attack started. The captain managed to get me to an escape pod before." "How many other survivors?" "None. I monitored communications until the end. Every ship was destroyed." Sarah absorbed this information with growing anger. The hegemony wasn't just committing genocide, they were doing it efficiently, systematically. But, there was something else in Vex's manner that caught her attention. "You're not just a refugee, are you?" she asked. Vex looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Defense cooperative. That's military terminology. And, the way you were monitoring communications, the technical knowledge." Sarah leaned forward. "You're part of the resistance." After a long moment, Vex nodded. "Was. I helped design defensive systems for the outer colonies, tried to create early warning networks. Fat lot of good it did us. Maybe more good than you think." Sarah made another quick decision. "How would you like a chance to hit back?" "Captain," Torres warned from the doorway. "We should discuss this privately." Sarah waved him off. "No secrets. We're all in this together now." She turned back to Vex. "The hegemony thinks they can commit genocide without consequences because they don't believe anyone will stand up to them. They think younger species are too weak, too divided, too scared to fight back effectively." "They're right," Vex said bitterly. "Look at what they did to us. 3,000 people, wiped out in minutes." "They're wrong," Kess interrupted, its young voice carrying surprising strength. "They're wrong because they don't understand humans." Sarah smiled grimly. "Exactly. The hegemony sees the galaxy in terms of hierarchy and submission. They can't comprehend a species that gets more dangerous when you threaten its friends." Vex looked between the human captain and the young Zephyrian cub. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we take this intelligence back to Earth. I'm suggesting we help the human military understand exactly what kind of enemy they're facing. And, I'm suggesting we make sure the hegemony learns what happens when you murder children." "The humans would fight for us?" Vex asked uncertainly. Sarah thought about Earth's history, about humanity's long record of taking on impossible odds when the cause was right. Master Engineer, my species once fought a world war because someone invaded Poland. Do you really think we're going to ignore systematic alien genocide? For the first time since his rescue, Vex's ears perked up slightly. Poland? Long story. The point is, humans have a tendency to escalate conflicts in ways that surprise everyone, including ourselves. Sarah stood up. The question is, are you willing to help us do it properly this time? Vex was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then, he looked at Kess, sitting small and determined beside the medical bay's main console. What would you have me do? Help us understand their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. Help us build something that can fight back effectively. Sarah's voice hardened. Help us make sure no more children watch their families die. Kess spoke up from its position by the console. The hegemony thinks they can control the galaxy through fear. But, Mother used to say that fear was just anger looking for direction. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. She'd heard similar words from human resistance fighters throughout history. Ordinary people pushed too far, deciding that dying on their feet was better than living on their knees. So what's it going to be, Master Engineer? Vex reached out again to touch Kess's shoulder, then looked up at Sarah with eyes that held a new spark of determination. When do we start? Sarah grinned, and, for the first time since rescuing Kess, she felt like they were moving forward instead of just running away. We start by getting home. Earth needs to know what's coming. And, the hegemony. She looked at the debris field rotating slowly outside the viewports. The hegemony needs to learn that humanity doesn't forget. And, we never forgive. The Endurance began its acceleration toward Earth space, carrying its precious cargo of survivors and secrets. Behind them, the wreckage of 3,000 murdered refugees continued its eternal orbit, a silent testament to the hegemony's cruelty. But, ahead lay Earth, and humanity's vast industrial capacity, and the prospect of turning righteous anger into something that could burn stars. The war was coming. This time, the hegemony would face an enemy that understood exactly what they were fighting for. 6 months had passed since the Endurance arrived at Earth carrying its cargo of survivors and intelligence. Sarah stood in the observation deck of the Orbital Command Station, watching the controlled chaos of humanity's largest military buildup in 3 centuries. Below them, Earth's shipyards worked around the clock. Massive construction frames held the skeletal forms of warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Traditional military doctrine called for massive dreadnoughts with heavy armor and devastating weapons. Human engineering had taken a different approach. The Retribution-class destroyers will be ready for trials next week, reported Admiral James Morrison, joining Sarah at the viewports. Fast, heavily armed, and built for swarm tactics. Just like you recommended. Sarah nodded, watching a completed destroyer maneuver away from its construction dock. The ship was smaller than traditional hegemony vessels but bristled with weapons and sensor arrays. More importantly, it looked angry, all sharp angles and aggressive lines that promised violence to anyone foolish enough to threaten Earth's allies. How many are operational? She asked. 47 and counting. Production is exceeding all estimates. Morrison paused. The engineers say they've never seen anything like the technical specifications your Zephyrian friends provided. Their power distribution systems are decades ahead of our own. Speaking of which, how are our consultants settling in? Morrison's weathered face softened slightly. Vex has been invaluable. He's working with our tactical planning division, helping us understand hegemony fleet movements and communication protocols. As for Kess, still refusing the relocation offers? Insists on staying in the tactical center. Claims it's too important to trust to adults. Morrison shook his head with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. That little furball has redesigned our entire point defense grid. Twice. Sarah smiled. In the months since arriving at Earth, Kes had thrown itself into the war effort with the focused intensity that only trauma could produce. The young Zephyrian spent 18 hours a day in the command center, absorbing everything humans knew about warfare and contributing insights that consistently impressed the military brass. The psychologists are worried, Morrison continued. They say the cub is suppressing its grief by focusing obsessively on revenge. They recommend counseling, maybe relocation to a civilian facility. And, what does Kes say about that? That revenge is a perfectly healthy response to genocide, and that humans are the first species it's met that seems to understand this. Sarah laughed despite herself. Hard to argue with that logic. The kid's not wrong. But, Sarah. Morrison's voice grew serious. This war is going to be different from anything humanity's ever fought. The hegemony has controlled this galaxy for centuries. They have technology we're just beginning to understand, resources that dwarf our entire civilization. They also have something else, Sarah pointed out. Arrogance. They think they know what they're fighting. And, we're going to show them they're wrong. We're going to show them what happens when you murder children in front of humans. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to the observation deck. The door slid open to reveal Kes, now wearing a custom-designed uniform that marked it as a technical consultant to the Terran Defense Force. The young Zephyrian had grown in the past 6 months, though whether that growth was physical or simply the forced maturation of war, Sarah couldn't say. Sarah, Admiral Morrison, Kes said formally. The fleet simulation has been completed. You should see the results. They made their way to the command center, a vast space filled with holographic displays and the controlled urgency of military planning. At the center of it all stood Master Engineer Vex, his silver fur now marked with the blue patches that indicated an honorary commission in Earth's forces. Ah, Sarah, he said, looking up from a tactical display. Perfect timing. Show them, young one. Kes moved to the main holographic projector, its small hands dancing over controls with practiced precision. The display came alive with a three-dimensional representation of space, scattered with the colored dots that represented ships. We simulated the Battle of Verdant Reach, Kes explained, its voice taking on the clinical tone it used when discussing technical matters. Scenario 1, Traditional Fleet Engagement. Blue forces represent the refugee convoy, red forces represent the hegemony battle group. The simulation played out quickly. The hegemony ships, larger and more heavily armed, systematically destroyed the Zephyrian vessels without taking significant damage. Total time to destruction, 14 minutes, 37 seconds, Kes reported. No survivor probability. Morrison grimaced. And, Scenario 2? Human intervention. Same initial conditions, but, with a squadron of Retribution-class destroyers arriving during the engagement. This time, the simulation was dramatically different. The human ships appeared at the edge of the battle space and, immediately spread out, using their superior speed to flank the hegemony formation. Instead of engaging directly, they launched coordinated swarms of missiles and energy torpedoes. The key is not to fight their fight, Kes explained, highlighting the tactical movements. Hegemony doctrine assumes line-of-battle engagements where superior firepower decides the outcome. But, humans use what Mother called chaos mathematics, introducing so many variables that traditional calculations become meaningless. Sarah watched the simulation with growing satisfaction. The human ships darted in and out of weapons range, never staying still long enough for the hegemony's heavy guns to target effectively. Meanwhile, their swarm missiles overwhelmed the alien point defense systems through sheer numbers. End result? Morrison asked. Total hegemony force destruction with minimal human losses, Kes reported. Battle duration, 8 minutes, 12 seconds. Refugee convoy survival probability, 94%. Vex moved to stand beside his young colleague. The mathematics are sound, but, there's something else to consider. The hegemony has never faced an enemy that deliberately increases tactical complexity. Their military philosophy is based on overwhelming force and predictable engagements. Meaning? Meaning, Sarah said, understanding immediately, they have no idea how to respond to an enemy that thrives on chaos. Exactly. Humans are the first species they've encountered that treats battlefield unpredictability as an advantage rather than a problem to be solved. Morrison studied the simulation results with obvious approval. When can we test these tactics in real combat? Sooner than you might think, reported Communications Officer Park, approaching with a data pad. We've been monitoring hegemony communications for the past week. They're planning another enforcement action against the remaining Zephyrian colonies. Sarah felt her blood grow cold. Which colonies? The Singing Garden system. Approximately 50,000 civilians, mostly researchers and their families. Kess went very still. I know that place. Cousin Mel lived there with her pod cluster. She studied atmospheric harmonics. The past tense wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Sarah reached out to touch the young Zephyrian's shoulder. When? She asked. Intelligence estimates 6 days until the hegemony fleet arrives in system, Park reported. Morrison was already moving toward the communications station. How many ships can we have ready for combat operations? 12 destroyers are fully operational, reported the tactical coordinator. Another 8 could be ready within 48 hours if we push the schedule. Do it. Morrison turned to Sarah. Captain Chen, I'm giving you operational command of Task Force Retribution. Your mission is to prevent the destruction of the Singing Gardens colonies. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and terror that came with important commands. Rules of engagement? The hegemony has declared genocide on a peaceful species. As far as I'm concerned, that makes them pirates and war criminals. Morrison's voice carried the cold anger that had been building in Earth's military leadership since learning the full scope of hegemony atrocities. Sink every ship they send. Admiral, Kess spoke up quietly. I want to come with you. The command center went quiet. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Young one, this will be a combat operation. It's not appropriate, they killed my family, Kess interrupted, its voice carrying a steel that seemed far too old for its young body. They killed my cousin. They're going to kill 50,000 more people just like them. I know their technology better than anyone else here, and I know their weaknesses. Sarah looked at the young Zephyrian, seeing not the traumatized child she'd rescued but the fierce intelligence that had emerged from grief. It'll be dangerous. Good, Kess said simply. It should be dangerous. What they did was dangerous. What we're going to do to them should be dangerous too. Morrison started to protest, but Vex intervened. Admiral, among my people, the right of vengeance belongs to the wronged. Kess has lost more than any of us. If the child chooses to claim that right. It's not a child anymore, Sarah said quietly, understanding something that had been building over the past months. The hegemony made sure of that when they murdered its family. She turned to Kess. If you come with us, you follow orders. No exceptions. Can you do that? Yes. And, if I tell you to stay in the ship while we're fighting? Then, I'll stay in the ship. But, I can help coordinate targeting from there. I know exactly where to hit them to make it hurt the most. Morrison looked around the command center, seeing the determination in every face. Finally, he nodded. Task Force Retribution launches in 36 hours. God help us all. As the command center returned to its urgent activity, Sarah found herself standing with Kess and Vex near the main tactical display. The holographic representation of the Singing Garden system rotated slowly, showing a beautiful collection of garden worlds that had taken centuries to terraform. Are you sure about this? She asked Kess quietly. The young Zephyrian looked up at her with eyes that held far too much knowledge for its age. Mother always said the garden grows strongest where the old growth has been cleared away. Kessa's voice carried a strange peace. Maybe it's time to clear away some old growth. Sarah looked at her young friend and realized that somewhere in the past 6 months, the frightened child she'd rescued had transformed into something else entirely. Something that understood war and loss and the terrible mathematics of justice. "All right then," she said. "Let's go teach the hegemony about chaos." The next 36 hours passed in a blur of final preparations. Ships were loaded with ammunition and supplies. Crews received their final briefings. Intelligence updates flowed in from human spy networks throughout hegemony space. And, in the command center, a young Zephyrian cub worked tirelessly to calculate the exact trajectory needed to save 50,000 lives. The war was about to begin in earnest. And, humanity was ready to show the galaxy what happened when you made them angry. The Singing Garden system was everything the intelligence reports had promised, 6 worlds of breathtaking beauty, each one carefully terraformed to support Zephyrian culture and research. From the bridge of the destroyer Defiance, Sarah could see delicate spires rising from crystal seas, vast libraries built into living coral formations, and the shimmer of atmospheric processors that painted the skies in impossible colors. In 18 hours, the hegemony intended to burn it all. "Task force positions confirmed," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. "All 20 destroyers are in place and maintaining sensor silence." Sarah nodded, studying the tactical display that showed her fleet scattered throughout the outer system. Traditional military doctrine called for concentrated formations, but human tactics embraced dispersion and unpredictability. When the hegemony arrived, they'd find enemies where they least expected them. "Kess, how are our targeting solutions looking?" The young Zephyrian looked up from the sensor console it had claimed as its own workspace. Over the past months, Kess had grown into its role as tactical coordinator, developing an intuitive understanding of space combat that impressed Sarah's experienced officers. "The hegemony will drop out of hyperspace at the traditional approach vector," Kess said, its voice carrying the confidence that came from understanding enemy psychology. "Their formation will be standard, 3 destroyers in a screen formation with the carrier holding back to launch fighters. And our response? Let them commit to the attack run on the primary world. Once they're focused on the bombardment, we hit them from 4 directions simultaneously." Kessa's ears flattened slightly. "They won't expect resistance. Certainly not effective resistance." Sarah felt a familiar chill at the young alien's clinical analysis of the coming battle. In the months since the rescue, Kess had developed a tactical mind that focused ruthlessly on enemy destruction. The trauma counselors called it an unhealthy fixation. Sarah called it exactly what the human fleet needed. "Captain," the sensor operator called out. "Hyperspace distortions detected. Multiple contacts, bearing 037 Mark 15. "Here we go," Sarah muttered. "All ships, maintain position and hold fire until my command." The hegemony fleet materialized at the edge of the system in a flash of displaced energy. For massive ships, 3 destroyers and an assault carrier that dwarfed anything in the human task force. Their hulls bore the angular, threatening design that marked hegemony military vessels, all sharp edges and weapon pods that promised swift annihilation to anyone who opposed the Alliance's will. "They're beautiful ships," Vex observed from his position at the engineering station. His voice carried the appreciation of a technical expert coupled with the hatred of someone who'd watched those same ships murder refugees. "They're about to be beautiful wrecks," Sarah replied. On the main display, the hegemony formation moved with the stately confidence of a fleet that had never faced serious opposition. The destroyers spread into attack formation while the carrier held position at the system's edge, already launching squadrons of fighters. "They're hailing the colonies," Torres reported. "Put it on speakers." The voice that filled the bridge carried the cold arrogance that characterized hegemony communications. Attention illegal settlements in the Singing Garden system. By order of the Galactic Hegemony Council, you are harboring criminals and seditious elements. You have 1 standard hour to surrender all resistance personnel and submit to authority transfer protocols. Compliance is mandatory. Sarah looked at Kes, seeing the young Zephyrian's ears flatten against its head. 1 hour to surrender people who don't exist for crimes they didn't commit. Standard hegemony procedure, Vex confirmed. They always offer surrender terms they know won't be accepted. It lets them claim they followed legal protocols before committing mass murder. Captain, the communications officer on one of the Garden worlds was broadcasting a response. Sarah had met Governor Winson during the evacuation preparations, an elderly Zephyrian administrator who'd spent his life building peaceful communities. Hegemony Fleet Commander, we are a research collective with no military capabilities and no involvement in resistance activities. We request neutral status under the Galactic Accords of 2387. The hegemony response came immediately. Neutral status is denied. You have 57 minutes to comply with surrender protocols. Sarah had heard enough. All units, this is defiance. Execute Chaos Pattern Alpha on my mark. She paused, looking around the bridge at her crew, humans who'd volunteered to fight an interstellar war for people they'd never met. Mark. 20 human destroyers came alive simultaneously, their drives flaring to maximum power as they broke from concealment. The hegemony formation, focused on the defenseless colonies ahead, had no time to react to threats that appeared from empty space in 4 directions at once. First salvo away, reported the weapons officer. The opening exchange lit up space with energy beams and missile trails. Human tactics called for overwhelming firepower delivered in precise bursts, not the sustained bombardments that hegemony ships expected to face. Direct hits on hegemony destroyer compliance, Kes reported from the sensor station. Their shields are fluctuating. Targeting their power distribution nodes, now. Sarah watched the tactical display as her ships darted in and out of weapons range like attacking insects. The hegemony vessels, designed for battles between massive fleets, struggled to target the smaller, faster human ships that refused to fight predictably. Compliance is breaking up, Torres called out. Massive secondary explosions. The first hegemony destroyer came apart in a series of brilliant flashes, its hull splitting along stress lines as internal power systems overloaded. Sarah felt a savage satisfaction that was immediately replaced by tactical concern. They're adapting faster than expected, she observed, watching the remaining hegemony ships adjust their formations. Scatter formation, prevent them from concentrating fire. But, the hegemony commander had experience that showed. Instead of trying to engage all the human ships simultaneously, the alien fleet focused its firepower on the destroyers closest to the colonies. Retribution is taking heavy damage, reported the communications officer. Captain Martinez reports his drive systems are failing. Sarah made a quick decision. All units, converge on the hegemony carrier. They want a traditional engagement, let's give them something traditional. Captain, Kes spoke up urgently. If we group our ships, their heavy weapons will tear us apart. Not if we're moving too fast for them to track. Sarah turned to her helmsman. Plot an intercept course for the carrier. Maximum acceleration. What followed was 3 minutes of the most intense space combat Sarah had ever experienced. 20 human destroyers, moving at velocities that stressed their structural limits, converged on the massive hegemony carrier from multiple vectors. The alien ship's point defense systems, designed to stop incoming missiles, struggled to target ships that moved like missiles but fought back. Hit them with everything, Sarah ordered as the Defiance screamed past the carrier's hull, close enough to see individual weapon emplacements. Make them remember this. The concentrated firepower of the human fleet ripped into the carrier's shields like hammers striking glass. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles overwhelmed the alien ship's defenses, opening massive breaches in its armored hull. Secondary explosions throughout their fighter bays, Kess reported with satisfaction. Their launch capacity is eliminated. But, the hegemony wasn't finished. The remaining destroyers, free from the need to protect the carrier, turned their full attention to the human fleet. Without the advantage of surprise, the smaller human ships began taking serious damage. Justice is gone, Torres reported grimly. Direct hit to their reactor. Sarah watched one of her ships disappear in a brief star as its fusion plant lost containment. 43 crew members, dead in an instant because they'd chosen to fight for strangers. Vengeance is reporting critical damage to their drive systems, came another report. They're dead in space. The battle was turning. The hegemony ships, larger and more heavily armed, were systematically destroying Sarah's fleet despite the humans' tactical advantages. In another 10 minutes, there wouldn't be enough human ships left to prevent the genocide of 50,000 Zephyrians. Captain, Kess said quietly. I have an idea. But, you're not going to like it. Sarah looked at the young alien, seeing something desperate in its large dark eyes. Tell me. The hegemony carrier isn't destroyed, just disabled. But, its computer systems are still active, still connected to the fleet network. Kessa's ears were flat against its head. If someone could get aboard and access their command protocols. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. We're not sending anyone on a suicide mission. It wouldn't be suicide. Not if the person understood hegemony technology well enough to stay ahead of their security systems. Kess looked directly at her. I could shut down their entire fleet from the inside. The bridge went quiet except for the sounds of combat, the hull transmitted vibrations of weapons fire and the electronic chatter of tactical communications. Sarah stared at the young Zephyrian, understanding exactly what it was proposing. Kess, you're 12 years old. I'm the only person here who understands their systems well enough to hack them in real time. Kessa's voice carried the same determination Sarah had heard when it first asked to join the fleet. And, I'm the one they hurt the most. This should be my fight. The answer is no. Sarah. Kess moved closer, its small hand reaching out to touch her arm. They killed my family. They killed my friends. In 16 minutes, they're going to kill 50,000 more people just like them. I can stop this. Let me stop this. Sarah looked around the bridge, seeing the faces of her crew. They understood the tactical situation as well as she did. Without some kind of miracle, the human fleet would be destroyed and the Zephyrian colonies would burn. There has to be another way, she said. There isn't, Vex said quietly from the engineering station. The child is right. It's the only chance we have. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of command in a way she'd never experienced before. When she opened them, Kess was watching her with that ancient patience that trauma could teach the young. If you do this, Sarah said slowly, you follow the plan exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. Get in, hack their systems, get out. I understand. And, if something goes wrong, then, I'll make sure they remember what happens when they murder children in front of humans, Kess said simply. Sarah felt her heart break a little more. Prep a stealth pod. Minimal energy signature, maximum speed. As her crew scrambled to prepare the insertion craft, Sarah knelt down beside Kess, putting her hands on the young alien's shoulders. Your mother would be proud of you, she said quietly. She'd be terrified for me, Kess corrected. But, she'd also know this is the right thing to do. The young Zephyrian's voice carried a peace that seemed far too mature. Besides, you promised me I wouldn't be alone anymore. Even if this goes badly, I know you'll remember me. All of us. Sarah pulled the young alien into a hug, feeling the warm fur and the rapid heartbeat of someone about to do something impossibly brave. Ready, Cap, reported the launch bay supervisor. Sarah released Kes and watched the young Zephyrian walk toward the launch bay with steady steps. At the doorway, Kes turned back. "Sarah? When this is over, will you tell them? About my family, about what they were like before all this happened?" "Every day," Sarah promised. "The whole galaxy will know." Kes smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from the young alien since the rescue. "Thank you for keeping your promises." The stealth pod launched 30 seconds later, a tiny speck racing toward the disabled hegemony carrier. Sarah watched it go, knowing she was sending a child to do what an entire battle fleet couldn't accomplish. "All units," she broadcast to the remaining human ships. "Maintain defensive positions. We're about to find out what happens when you make a Zephyrian angry." In the depths of space, a small pod approached an enemy ship, carrying the hopes of 2 species and the fury of a child who'd lost everything. The war was about to change forever.